Good evening and welcome to this, our third event in OSU's Holocaust Memorial program. Tonight we are privileged to have as our honored speakers Mr. Leslie Aigner and his wife, Mrs. Eva Aigner. The Aigners are both survivors of the Holocaust years in Europe. After being sent to Budapest from his native Czechoslovakia, Mr. Aigner was later deported and interned at both the Auschwitz and then Dachau death camps. Mrs. Aigner survived the war years in the Budapest ghetto with her family. Once they arrived in America after the war and eventually made their home and raised their children in the greater Portland area, the Aigners, like many survivors, attempted to cope with their past by remaining silent about those experiences for much of their adult life. Some 10 years ago, however, when they became cognizant of neo-Nazi movements and growing ranks of Holocaust deniers and revisionists, the Aigners broke a silence of nearly 50 years and have been committed to the public testimony of their respective stories ever since. They have spoken throughout the region, and for the past 2 years have participated in our own program here at OSU, speaking in the public high schools, 2 years ago in Lebanon and last year in Corvallis High in town. As members of the generation who lived through the Nazi attempt at the genocide of the European Jewry, the Aigners bearing witness to Nazis' atrocities is indeed pivotal to all of us. Those generations who have only received these narratives, but who must nevertheless contend with and position the Holocaust in our understanding of the possibilities of human barbarity, and perhaps to become the gauntlet against the repetition of such as we move into the 21st century. Living proof of the most unfortunate and yet significant events of Western history in this century, the Aigners would tell you tonight their own personal stories. And as their generation leaves behind such narratives, the vicarious experience that comes from listening to these must serve us all well. After the Aigners' presentation, they invite you to come down and see some photos that they've taken in their return to Europe and to the camps that Mr. Aigner was interned at. Please join me now in welcoming Mr. and Mrs. Aigner and offering them our heartfelt appreciation for their continuing participation in our program.
Good evening. I always love to come to Corvallis because our daughter graduated from this college, and this is such a beautiful city. So that makes it easier for us to come here and talk about these topics because we have a lot of wonderful memories coming to Corvallis. Thank you for the introduction. And as Mr. Davis mentioned that we didn't talk about the Holocaust for many, many, many years. It's painful. We didn't want to bring up these painful memories. We sort of buried it behind us and we tried to live a life. We wanted to build a life and think about living and not about dying. But when in 1992, the Anne Frank exhibit was going through Oregon, and about that time, the neo-Nazi movement was getting hold, my husband got very angry and he said, I have to speak up because this really happened. I lived it. How can people say the Holocaust never happened? And we decided if we're not going to speak up and people not going to meet us who lived the Holocaust and others, that we're taking it with us one day to the grave and nobody really going to know what happened from personal experiences. I born in 1937 in Czechoslovakia in a small town, Košice. My family was religious Jews. My father was a hat maker. He had a small business. We were 4 of us in the immediate family. I had a sister who was 8 years older. And we lived a very quiet, peaceful, religious life. In 1939, when the Nazi era started to foothold in Europe, my father's business license was taken away because he was a Jew. Living in this small town in Košice, all the neighbors, pretty much everybody knew who you are. And as he was going around and trying to find employment to support his family, he got denied from most of his friends and neighbors. Nobody wanted to stick out their neck to hire a Jew. After about 4 or 5 months, when he was really losing his funds and he couldn't support the family anymore, talked to one of his brothers who lived in Budapest in Hungary, and he said, you know, Budapest is a big town, 2 million population. Why don't you move your family here? You can get lost in this city. You will be able to get a job. So my father packed our belongings on a train. We moved up to Budapest, and sure enough, in a few months, he was able to get a job, and he was working as a hat maker to someone else's business. Every day in this time, new and new laws came out against discriminating the Jewish people. In early 1943, my father was inducted into the forced labor camp, and he was taken from us. I started first grade, went to a public school. Pretty soon the law came out, all the Jews have to wear a yellow star on their clothing. Even though I was a little child, I still remember my mother sitting in the evening, cutting out yellow material and sewing a yellow star on each of us, on my sisters, herself, and my clothing. So we were marked. As I was going to school one day, and this is the first time I really felt that I was discriminated against, even though I was a child. Every morning in the school, as we started the school day, we were saying the national prayer in front of a flag in the classroom. One morning the teacher said, "Jewish children, stand up." It was 6 or 7 of us in the class, and we were told we had to leave the class. We can no longer say the national prayer with the rest of the children. Even though we were little, we understood we are different. We are not like the others. We were singled out. I don't ever want another child to ever have this feeling again. You grow up with a feeling all your life that you are different, and people don't like you for what you are because of your religion or for whatever reason. As time went on, more and more laws came out against the Jews. We had to turn in all our valuables. We were not allowed to own anything valuable. We were not allowed to listen to the news. Radios were confiscated. We were not allowed to buy newspapers. And in the evenings, pretty soon it was told that Jews were not allowed to go out on the street after dusk. The next thing what happened to us, they started to gather the Jews into an area which was called the ghetto. This was a certain section of town where we were gathered, and it was surrounded by barbed wire, and all the buildings were marked with a yellow star, a big yellow star, and we were moved into these buildings. They were some of them apartment buildings, and in each apartment sometimes 30, 40 people were pushed into living in the quarters. We just barely had room to lay down, hardly any sanitation, and they were feedings, 2-3 times mass feedings a day in the ghetto. It was very difficult, very hard, no food, and also the sanitation with that many people being pushed into the quarters was very bad. Sicknesses were spreading fast. We were living in this condition. Mind you, all the able-bodied men were already taken to the forced labor camp to help the German Nazi war machinery. It's just the women, older people, and children were left. As we were in the ghetto, one day, the Hungarian Nazi officers marched in, and they started to gather the still able-bodied people in the ghetto. My mother was 38 years old that time, and she was also picked out to be taken. But you can imagine how devastated my sister and I was, 2 children. I was 7 years old by that time, and she was 15. And our father was taken away, and now they were picking our mother up. We didn't know how we were going to survive. And she was taken by these Nazi guards on gunpoint. We didn't know where. As we find out later, my mother was taken to a gathering place where they were loading these Jewish people onto wagons, and they were taken toward the concentration camp. My mother couldn't live with the thought that she left her 2 little children behind. And the first time they opened the train door, she jumped and started to run, started to escape. As she was running, a German soldier, mind you, a soldier, a Wehrmacht, yelled at her on a gunpoint and said, "Halt! Stop!" My mother spoke German. She spoke several languages. And she got down on her knees and grabbed this soldier's boots and says, "Please, let me go. I have 2 little children. My husband is already taken. I don't know where he is. If I don't get back to my children, they never survive." This man was a righteous man. He broke down. He pulled out a picture from his wallet and showed it to my mother. He says, "Look, I have a wife and 2 children back there. I don't want to fight this war. But the only thing I can do for you, I'm going to turn away. If you can run, try to escape." And my mother ran into the woods, and she walked back. It took her several days to Budapest. She tore off her yellow star so nobody would recognize that she's a Jew. And she walked back into the ghetto where she last left us. Find out that that part of the ghetto was emptied just on that day. And she found out they took down around 800 people to the riverfront of the Danube. She ran down as fast as she could to the riverfront. And what I'm going to tell you, it only can be a miracle. What saved us, she recognized my sister's crying voice in the line. The 800 people who were standing on the riverfront was shot into the river. That time they called the Danube not the blue Danube, but the red Danube, because it was red from blood. She bribed one of the guards and says, "Please, let these children go." And he says, "Well, Jewish children cannot wander around by the city. I have to escort them back to the ghetto." So we were escorted back to the ghetto from the line. And in the ghetto, where my mother, my sister, and I survived, my father never came back. Neither did a lot of the rest of my family. They were killed, part of them in Czechoslovakia, part of them in Hungary, just a very few of us left. When Budapest ghetto was liberated by the Russian soldiers, we were in very bad condition already. Sanitation, like I told you, was bad. We had all kinds of illnesses. There was no food available. My mother told me that I could no longer walk, that between my sister and her took turns and took them practically a whole day just to walk a few blocks to get back to our original apartment. We got back to our apartment and it was completely empty. We didn't even have a pillow or a blanket to cover with. All the neighbors and the people who lived around there, they took all the Jewish belongings. Everything was taken from us. It was very hard to get started, but we were just happy to be alive and to have our freedom. Our freedom was a little bit different because it was communist Hungary for 11 years while I was growing up. And in 1956, when the Hungarian Revolution broke out, that's when we came to the free country of the United States. And I cannot tell you enough what it means to be free. It's probably very difficult to understand what it means that when you can have a free choice to worship your religion, or have a free choice to educate yourself and go to school, and to have a free choice about your life. We didn't have that choice when we were growing up. And the reason we are here to tell you our experiences, that you realize how we have to fight against hatred and bigotry so we could continue to live with this free choice and never allow any people for their religion or nationality or race or for any reason to be discriminated. My husband was 15-year-old when he was taken to the camps, and his memory of what happened is even much more than mine. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to him, and when he's finished with his talk, please ask both of us questions. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for taking out from your busy time to came and listen to us. I'm going to talk about in 3 segments of my life at these troubled times. In 1939, peace, pre-war, and then the camp time, and then after how we recuperated from the losses. In 1939, I was a 10-year-old boy. I lived in Czechoslovakia, about 100 kilometers away from where my wife lived. We didn't know each other at that time. The things what happened with us, it is similar at that time. And what I'm going to talk about it when I get to the camp, describing the camp, it is almost unbelievable for many of you because you lived a sheltered life, except people who've been in the Second World War, Vietnam, or Korea. They can assess the brutality of human beings, what they can dish out for each other. As I said, 1939, I was a 10-year-old boy. And same thing with my father happened. He was a small businessman having a couple of pair of horses, 2 flatbed wagons. He was the moving man of the town, transfer man for the merchants and for people who moved from houses to apartment or vice versa. We were a tight-knit family. I went to Hebrew school, and it was 1939 when I first experienced real discrimination. Coming and going to school, I was chased and beaten many, many times because I was a Jew. When it came to a Passover night, we were 25 of us sitting at my grandmother's place celebrating Passover. And I remember visiting my cousins, we lived, almost the whole family lived on the same street. But all this came to an end in 1939. Because my father lost his business license, he moved up to Budapest and settled outskirts of Budapest and find job. But his job from 1939 till 43, it lasted. In the same time, I stayed with my grandmother to finish my elementary education in the same school I started. So I was visiting my parents on a vacation time, which Budapest was about 150 kilometers from my hometown, because this part of Czechoslovakia became Hungary in 1939. That's when the trouble started. And when I moved up to Budapest, that was 1943. Our troubles were deepening. End of 1943, my father was inducted to the forced labor camp, taken to the Russian front to build bridges for the Nazi war machinery and roads. But before he went, he took me to a machine shop. He says, "Son, you're going to have to learn something to make a living. You're going to be a machinist." because for Jewish children there was no availability, there was not allowed to be in higher education. So in the end of 1943 I started working as an apprentice in a machine shop. Same time my father was taken, so my mother, my older sister, he was a year older, and my younger sister, she was 9 years old, 8 at the time. But this didn't last that too long. My sister was ordered into a paper mill of the town, and they put up barrack-like situation for Jewish workers. On the weekend she was able to come home. And then things got worse. We were ordered to move into the ghetto. In this little town, the ghetto was established right by the biggest manufacturing plant in Hungary. They were hoping because we are there, they will not be bombed. But we've been bombed many, many times. There was a lot of casualties. We hardly moved into the ghetto, being there less than a month, when a Nazi with a band on his arm with an arrow cross, the equivalent of the swastika, came to the door and ordered us to pack. Pack small packages what we can carry. So my mother, my 9-year-old sister, and myself packed. Sure enough, 2 days later, trucks stopped in front of the ghetto, and we were ushered up on these trucks. We were taken to another outskirt town of Budapest, where they established a camp in an abandoned brick factory, barbed wires, machine gun guards. People were sleeping under the drying area, and ironically even in the oven, because we were so crowded on these grounds. When about 3,000 or 4,000 people got together, they pushed in the railroad cars, the cattle cars, and we were ordered on the cattle cars. 80 of us or more into one car. The doors were shut and we were on our way. They gave us a half a barrel for necessities and shut the door. At night, half of us were able to squat down, then we changed. In the daytime, it was hot in these cattle cars. We were changing pace by the 4 barbed wire little window for some fresh air. In this condition, we arrived to Auschwitz. Some of the older people never made it. We were ordered out of the cattle cars into the platform in Auschwitz and were separated in the groups. Mothers, children, able-bodied people had to be lined up and start marching in front of Dr. Mengele. Dr. Mengele was the chief medical officer of Auschwitz. His motion to the left or right meant life or death. I went to the right, went into the camp. Dismal place, dehumanizing. We were shaved, ordered to take a shower. We were issued blue and gray uniforms and wooden clog for our feet. This way we marched into the camp. The encampment where I was, there was about 20 barracks in 2 rows. Used to be the Polish army horse stable. They put up bunk beds 3 high, and we were laying on one level, 8 or 10 of us. And when it came to feeding time, I have to say feeding time, the first man, as we lined up for food, got a pot in his hand, and then they measured into it 8 or 10 ladle of soup, depend on how many it fit. Then they counted down 8 or 10 person. And we sat down around this pot of soup. It looked like soup. It just didn't look like a soup. It was a gray liquid with some potato in it. And we spoon at a time ate that soup, watching each other like hawks, that everybody gets no more than their share. Because after being in Auschwitz just a week, we realized that food meant life. And so we watched that each of us gets their share. But before I go further, because the crowd is pretty good, I want to distribute these pictures. These pictures were taken in a ghetto. And the way it survived, that I took it in for development, and a year later when I came back, I find it in a place, these pictures. And this picture is from the liberation of Dachau. Anyway, in Auschwitz was a camp where nobody really stayed too long. Auschwitz was a camp where, as transport arrived, they selected able-bodied people out for within 2 weeks or 3 weeks and sent them deep into Germany to man the factories, because most of the German men was in a war. I stayed in Auschwitz 3.5 months, almost 4 months. At one time, they came around and wanted volunteers for work. And I put up my hand, and I thought I lucked out. I went to work on a kitchen. I worked there almost 3 months. While I was working on the kitchen, I was able to eat raw potato and raw cabbage as much as I can master down, because that's all I was cutting this time. But I mainly will talk about what I witnessed, what I experienced in Auschwitz. The daily brutality, the head counts, the standing out in sunshine or cold before the commandant came and made the head count, sometimes took hours. From the heat and from the cold, a lot of people suffered. What I witnessed in Auschwitz, and the next encampment to mine, which was about the same size, were the Russian prisoners of war encampment. These Russian prisoners were captured when their plane were shot down, and they were taken to Auschwitz concentration camp. Actually, Auschwitz-Birkenau. And at one occasion, 5 of these Russian prisoners escaped. They were working out on a field, dismantling damaged Nazi airplanes, pulling out usable parts. At one occasion, 5 of them were able to escape. A few days later, they brought them back. 2 were shot to death, and the other 3 was hanged on an open place with a place card on their chest. I escaped. Here I am again. On the opposite side of my encampment were the twins' encampment. Dr. Mengele painfully selected out all the twins from the arriving transport. They were put through a very painful and terrible experiments, medical experiments. The Nazis' experiments on these twins of all kinds of human guinea pig type experiment. What I didn't mention, when I arrived to Auschwitz, on a platform where we were separated from my mother and my 9-year-old sister, where I saw them last time, we saw these chimneys. And naively, as a 15-year-old, I thought those must be the bakery. Later I was informed that that's the crematorium. And when I was in Auschwitz for 3.5 months, the human burned smell never left us. It was always around us. Those chimneys never stopped puking out smoke. I saw transport arriving to Auschwitz, 2, 3 of them, occasionally, and not one person came into the camp. The camp was full. They didn't need bodies to feed. They all went to the gas chamber and to the crematorium. As I mentioned, I was working in a kitchen, and at one occasion I was talking to the fellow next to me, and the Nazi guard yelled, "Shut up," and I didn't hear it. And he hurled a pitchfork at me, which went through my right foot. I was disabled. I couldn't go back to work. I was taken to the so-called hospital barrack. This encampment had a hospital barrack. At least I was able to get off of my feet. No medication. I got some bandages of my foot. But at least I was off of my foot. I was there about 10 days. Dr. Epstein, who was a Jew from Prague, who was the medical doctor of this so-called hospital, came around and pointed, you, and you. I was included. Go back to your barrack. I was pleading with him, "Doctor, I'm not well yet. I'm still limping. A limping Jew out there is a dead Jew." He was very adamant. He sent me back to my barrack. The same night, trucks rolled up front of the hospital, and who was not able to walk out were taken to the crematorium. The Nazis didn't want to feed people who they could not use. So Dr. Epstein saved my life. I couldn't go back to the work in the kitchen. I still was limping a little bit. But I dreaded the thought that I'm going to have to go in front of an inspection, because who did not have a job in Auschwitz were sent out to Germany to man the factories, if I was able-bodied. In the meanwhile, they are always inspected if everybody is okay who is there. At this time, it was October in 1944, exactly I don't know the date. One occasion we heard an explosion. As we later learned, one of the crematorium was blown up by the Sonderkommando. The Sonderkommando was the man who was working in the crematorium, feeding the crematoriums, pulling out bodies from the gas chambers, 1,000 people at a time, some of them recognizing their own kin. The Sonderkommando was eliminated every 2 months or 3 months because they went through too much. They were human wrecks. They couldn't do the job later. And this Sonderkommando realized that their time is coming up. They got hold of some explosives, and they blew up one of the crematoriums. And that afternoon, the machine guns never stopped going. All 450 of the Sonderkommando were gunned down. These were heroes, but they never were able to talk about it. Later, just recently I learned that the Sonderkommando got their explosives from women who worked outside Auschwitz in an ammunition factory. These women stole some gunpowder in their pocket and through the grapevine let the Sonderkommando have it. This is how they were able to blow up one of the crematorium. After this, the Nazis were short of crematorium, and my job in the barrack was to put the barrels which were in the end of the barrack, because at night we weren't allowed to go out from the barrack, put these half-filled barrels on the wagon and push it out from the camp and dump it on the field. And one time as we were pushing this wagon out, I saw it with my own eye. The Nazis ordered the inmates to dig big foundation-like ditches. They were short of one crematorium, so they used these ditches, a layer of wood, a layer of bodies, to burn bodies in these open pits. I still was limping, as I said, and on one occasion, as we were selecting out a transport, I was desperate to get out of Auschwitz, but I couldn't go through the selection. I saved up a couple of portions of my bread, and one young man about my size, I offered the bread in exchange the clothes. He got the different clothes. We were still in a cotton uniform. Being October, the outgoing transport were getting a flannel uniform of same colors. The young man took the offer, took the bread, and we exchanged clothes. His number became my number. Only thing I couldn't change, the tattoo. He was tattooed because every outgoing transport from Auschwitz were tattooed. Luckily, they never checked the tattoo on my arm. They usually checked that when they had to mark the person out of the book, like our name. That was the number. So I was in a transport. Later, this young man told me that he wanted to stay in Auschwitz because his father was in Auschwitz. Back to the cattle cars, second time. We were heading deep into Germany. We went to Bayern, near München. We arrived to a small town named Landsberg. As we walked through the outskirts of this town, one of the older men, maybe 30, 35, at that time seemed older, pointed out a building. This is the building, the prison, where Hitler wrote Mein Kampf. Mind you, I was 15 years old. I didn't know what Mein Kampf was. I just experienced it. We went to work on a project. On the last picture there is from the archives of the bunker which we were building, a bunker which was 900 some feet long, 250 some feet wide, and 5-story high. 10-foot thick reinforced concrete. 30,000 people worked on this project. There was 28 sub-camps around this place. These sub-camps belonged to Dachau. They were feeding it and replenishing this sub-camp from Dachau time to time. At one occasion, as we were working on this project and pushing the narrow railroad car with a steel to the place, one of the fellows stumbled and fell into the steel reinforcement. The Nazi guards never let us stop the pouring of the cement. His screaming is in my ear today too. Mind you, when 1992 I went back to Germany to commemorate the camps, we were 114 of us for these camps, for the commemoration. And I wasn't the only one who saw people buried in this monstrous building. This building today is still in use. In the Cold War era, the American headquarters was in it. It's air conditioned. You can't even find it because it's trees growing on top of it. Today, the German army owns it and still in use. When we went there in 1992, we went down to the bottom of this building inside and we said a prayer for the people who were buried in there. As we were working on this monstrous building, we were getting weaker and weaker. It took 2 men to do 1 man's job. And it was a pleasure when the Allied Air Force came bombing. They didn't bomb this area because when it came, the work was halted and everything went into dark and we were sitting. That was our small pleasure. We didn't have to work for that half an hour or hour. But all this work came to an end because the Allied forces, heavy artillery we were hearing it from a distance. And we were hoping that they come soon enough. They stopped the work. I was ordered to march to a next encampment, which was Kaufering. As we were marching toward this other camp, marching to outskirts of Kaufering, people from behind the fences and from windows were throwing food into our line. The Nazis did not allow any sympathy to the concentration camp inmates. These people were endangering their own safety doing this. But these were German people who fought with us, who stick their neck out. We got into this camp. Mind you, the last shower I took, it was in Auschwitz. The sanitation was very meager. Bucket of water, we were able to wash ourselves down, 5, 10 of us. We all had lice. I contracted typhus. I was put into one of those barracks, what you see on the last picture, shoulder to shoulder, high fever, very little food and water, what the others were bringing in. I was in there a week or 10 days, I don't know, because I was in delirious fever. When I came to, there was ample room around me. The rest of them were carried out. When I staggered out from this barrack in the April sunshine, this was April 1945, hardly were able to hold my eyes open because of the light. The barrack was dark inside. I was itching and I took off my trousers, and on my shin I was covered with lice like an anthill. When I swiped it off, my skin went with it. One nice thing happened with us in Kaufering. The Nazis wanted to save face, maybe, I don't know. They let in the Red Cross for inspection. Well, I didn't have too much to inspect, seeing our conditions. But the nice thing was they were able to distribute some food and some blankets. I still remember the little can of Borden's milk, that heavy, thick, syrupy stuff. It helped me survive what I got. But our saga didn't end yet. As the heavy artillery of the Allied forces came closer and closer, the Nazis had another saga for us. We were ordered to march out to the railroad tracks, back to the cattle cars, third times. But this time it was different. Both of the tracks were going the same direction. The concentration camp inmates on one track, and on another track, the retrieving Nazi forces, heavy artillery, ammunition. Again, the Nazis thought because we are there, the Allied Air Force will not harm us. As we were traveling, there was an air raid, and airplanes came down with machine guns hitting the train. At the first pass, two of the fellow beside me fell, bullet in them. The second pass, it was daylight in this cattle car, tore open the roof. By this time, the Nazi guards were gone. Somebody opened the cattle car, because some of the cattle cars were not closed wagons, they were open trains, as you see it on those pictures. And we stumbled out of this cattle car down an embankment and went into hiding into the woods. Again, hoping that the Allied forces will come soon enough. We were not that lucky. Nazis came a couple of days later. They ushered us back with dogs, find us in the woods, back to the cattle cars. They never removed the bodies. This is the condition we arrived to Dachau. This train, after arrival, were called a death train. There were more dead bodies arriving to Dachau than living ones. As we walked in Dachau, I was in Dachau only 1 week. This was very close to the end of the war. Arrived after April 20th to Dachau. Food was very scarce. The whole commandment was in disarray. The high command already left. Just the guards stayed. And in 1945, April 29, we were liberated by the 7th Army of the United States. It was my most glorious day of my life. And I'm still, every day, grateful to your father or grandfather who fought this war over there. After this liberation, things changed rapidly. We got plenty of food. Matter of fact, it was too much at first. I remember getting hold of a can of corned beef, and I was saving it, couple of two or three spoonfuls at meal times. I didn't know if I gonna get another one. I was by then a walking skeleton. I had to hang on to somebody or some walls to walk. Some of the fellows who couldn't hold back eat too much of this rich stuff, and they never made it. Their weakened condition couldn't hold the rich food. But then the liberators wised up and started cooking differently. I was taken to the Army Field Hospital, where I stayed almost a month to recoup my strength, to be able to walk. At one occasion, a couple of American doctors walked on the alley and were talking about us. I didn't speak any English at that time, but one of the fellows translated what they were talking about. They were talking about us, that these human wretches have about, on the average, not more than 15 years to live. Well, thanks God, I beat the odds. I'm going to be 69. After I was able to walk, everybody were looking to get out. Mind you, it was beautiful to be in this so-called, it was a hospital, it was a real hospital, even though it was a tent. After over 10 months, first time I slept in white sheet. But after we got back our strength, we all wanted to get back home. Find out who we have. Transport were going out of Dachau every direction. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Holland, France. So I got on a transport to go back to Czechoslovakia, to my hometown. We went through Prague and a lot of disinfection, DDT and all that to get clean. Actually, I was clean, but they still disinfected us every time when we went through a bigger city. I got back to my hometown, I find nobody. So I went back to Budapest, outskirts of Budapest, where we lived, and went to the paper mill where my sister worked last time, because she stayed over there working in the paper mill. One of the fellows who I know came out from the mill after work, and I asked him, what about the people who worked in the encampment? He said, my sister escaped in December 1944. And he instructed me which way I could look her up. So sure enough, my sister and I were reunited. My sister escaped from this encampment and went into Budapest and put herself up as a bombed out girl from the countryside, no papers, and she worked for a Gentile family as a maid till the end of the war. And my father survived. On the Russian front, when the Russians were pushing the Nazis back, he hid, and behind the Russians' line, he came home. And he received my letter from a Gentile friend, which I wrote from Auschwitz. The Nazis ordered us in Auschwitz to write letters home, to calm the nerves of the people who are home, that we are okay. We had to write a certain way. I couldn't write German, so I had to ask another fellow to write. And so I wrote, dear uncle, I called him uncle, let my father and my sister know that I'm okay, I'm well, and I'm with my friends. Between the lines, I wanted to let whoever gets the letter that I'm not with my mother. So the reuniting with my father and my sister was another beautiful day of my life. 3 of us from my own small family survived. Probably this is what helped me keep my sanity. Beside this, for all the 25 people, 2 of my cousins survived, none others. We started rebuilding our life. It was communism, but it was more humane. We didn't have our freedom. I went back to work as an apprentice, became a machinist, and started working in one of the factories. Our original home was pilfered, nothing was left, so we started from ground zero. And tried to rebuild our life. In 1956, I met my wife, and after a long courtship, exactly 59 days, we were married. In the same year, end of 1956, the Hungarian Revolution broke out against the Russian ruling. That's when we decided we have to leave the country. But what made this decision was a little bit more interesting. As the revolution was going on, we were standing in line for bread. Food was very scarce. Sometimes we went to front of the bakery midnight and we changed guard of the family, changed guard and kept a line. And as we standing in this line, we overheard 2 men talking. First we get rid of the communists, and after we go after the leftover Jews. Anti-Semitism, still left over, very rampant. That's when we decided we have to leave the country. And so we left everything with a small backpack, with my father, who remarried by then, and my stepmother and my wife, headed for the Austrian border. And it was 1956 Christmas Eve when we crossed the border in knee-deep snow to Austria. But that's another saga I could talk about. We went to Vienna and went to the American consulate, and my stepbrother, my stepmother's son, who were liberated in Buchenwald, never came back to Hungary. He was 16 years old and as a refugee came to the United States and settled in Portland. And because he was here, when we went to the American embassy, there is an affidavit of expectance were there already for us, and actually for my stepmother. But because we were a family, they didn't separate us. So this is how we came to Portland and settled. And I started working here in Portland at Cascade Corporation by I-84 as a machinist. Worked there for more than 18 years. Then I worked for Tetronics in Wilsonville for another 14 years. Then I retired in 1992. But in the meanwhile, we had family. 1960, my daughter born. 64, my son. So we started a new family, a new life. Defeating Hitler. We were alive and thriving. And thriving in a beautiful country like the United States and living a free man's life. Thank you.
we open up for questions, I'd like to tell you one more thing. We talked about what we experienced as Jews. There were 11 million people killed in the camps, 6 million Jews and 5 million others. And some of those people were discriminated because of their political beliefs, maybe because they didn't want to bear arms like the Jehovah's Witnesses, handicaps, gays, all people from all walks of life who didn't live up to Hitler's so-called perfect race. And this is why we are here talking to you, to see what discrimination can do and how much human suffering it can create. Now I'd like to open for you for questions. My mother and sister both survived the war, and my sister lived until age 51 and died of natural death in Budapest. And I was able to bring my mother out here, and she lived her happiest and best years in this country, and she died in Portland, Oregon in age 84. And my husband's father lived to be 91. We couldn't practice religion openly as all these atrocities started in Europe. And a lot of people who went through the Holocaust, either their faith became that much stronger because they felt, I survived, God was watching out for me, and I really became a believer. And there is the other person who says, how could have this happened to people, to innocent children, to women, to men, and they are not believers. So you find very mixed emotions among the survivors.
Arriving to Auschwitz, I didn't have not one friend, because I moved up to Budapest when I was 15 and in the last year, and after that it was curtailment and I couldn't meet up with other friends, Jews. And so I arrived and I was totally alone, but camaraderie was always among us. We looked after each other. How did I? It was a day by day, and again I was hoping that I will find somebody. If I survive. And I wanted to survive as it's a human nature, another day all the time. Even though I saw all these death around me, like in Auschwitz, many mornings we woke up and there were people hanging on electric barbed wire who couldn't take it anymore. And then the guards, when you approached and walked accidentally too close to the barbed wire, they were allowed to shoot without question. It was like open season on Jews. I shouldn't say just Jews, anybody in a concentration camp. Because in the encampment where I was in Auschwitz, there was a lot of gypsies, priests, clergymen. And so it was just a day-by-day survivor to be saving energy and eating all the food you can get hold of. That was just a willpower in a way. But some just couldn't hack it because of the brutality and the inhumanity which we went through.
Yes. It was a very nice experience for us because we lived in communism, mind you, after the war for 11 years. Housing was in shortage, food many times was shortage. I mean, it was much better than before, but much better than during the war, but still we had a lot of shortages and we were not free. We were not free to go to school. We were not free to practice not just Jewish religion, any kind of a religion in communism wasn't free. So when we arrived to Portland after our saga through of escaping and all what we went through, it was like a beautiful dream, except we didn't speak the language. We didn't have a dime in our pockets. and we had to make a living, and it was tough. But we loved the freedom, and we made a life. We made friends. We learned to work, and learned to make a freeman's life here. Yes.
I'm curious, how is it that your stepson came out here, all the way out to the West Coast, Portland, rather than in, say, in the Eastern? Since I came from outside of New York, I know that so many came over and settled there, and I'm often curious as to how they happened to make a home.
My husband's stepbrother, when he came out to the United States after the camps, when he inquired about his family, his father was killed in the camps. And through the Red Cross, he was told that all his family is wiped out. So he thought he was a total orphan. So when he arrived to the United States, there were people from different states who said they are taking on so many refugees. And a family took him in here in Portland, and that's how he ended up here. And a couple of years later, through the Red Cross, he found out that his mother and one of his brother lives. And so now that's how we ended up here.
In 1980, when my daughter was close to 20 and my son was 15, 16, I shared the experience with them. My daughter wrote an essay about my experiences. And at one occasion, not shortly after I told them, my son asked me that they, learning about the Second World War, asked me to go into the high school and talk about it. I was very resentful about it, but I went. It was a disaster. I couldn't finish my talk. But then, as my wife mentioned, in 1992 when I retired, I heard all these stories that this never happened. Made me mad enough to say that I will talk about it. And so since then, I'm going to schools, colleges, churches, wherever I'm invited, and talk about my experience. I'm not talking about the Holocaust philosophically. I don't bring too much numbers up because I'm just talking about my personal experience. All those things can be learned from a book. Yes, one thing, survivors find each other, not because of the number of on their arms, but even in this town, in Portland, we find each other. But in 1995, I was invited back to Landsberg. It's a beautiful town in Bavaria, to commemorate the camps where we were encamped by the mayor of Landsberg. And I met up with 114 survivors from those 28 camps who came from Israel, some from Europe, and about 80 of them from United States. And we went to the campsites because none of them, very few barracks are standing any place. And we went to Landsberg, and I met up with a gentleman who was on the very same train I was. He remembered the machine gunning airplanes coming down, and he escaped, but he went to the other direction. What happened to him, two German girls picked him up, hid him in a barn, and kept him feeding. He told me his story. Personally, we didn't know each other, but we realized between our talk that we were in the same place at the same time. These German girls feed him and kept him hidden till the Allies liberated the area. This gentleman came to the United States and settled, became a successful businessman. And 15 years later, he went back to Landsberg, wanted to look up these girls who saved him. He found them. and he was very appreciative, naturally. And one of the girls were married already, had a 15-year-old son. And this son became the mayor of Landsberg, who invited all the survivors who were available through the American Holocaust Museum. The archives have our names, and whoever been in those camps were invited. Not many of us, well, not all of us went, because it was an experience which we didn't know how it will end. We didn't look forward to go back to the camps. We were very apprehensive going back, how we will be taken. And it turned out to be a good experience, a healing experience. Besides going to all these campsites and commemorating and putting some flowers and talks in the area, we had a town hall meeting. There was about 400 people in there, older people, high schooler, military people, all walks of life. The Bayern governor was there, and we were talking about. I got to talk over there, and the translator translated into German. I talked about a new time, after 2 generations, a new dialect between Germans and Jews. Some of the older people was apprehensive. They remembered the camps, but they didn't want to talk about it, naturally. But all in all, it was a very healing experience, and these pictures are from the commemoration of the 50th year.
Some of the young people on this meeting were accusing of the older German generation because for the first 25 years after the war, they didn't talk about the war, they didn't teach it in the schools or the camps. These young people didn't know a thing about it. In fact, in this area in Landsberg, it was a young professor who discovered the old camp area and started to ask questions. So the young people were resenting it, that the parents and the grandparents didn't tell them what was their history in their time. I'm just going to repeat the question the young lady asked, that she heard that some of the liberators were not sympathetic to the camp inmates because there was a lot of anti-Semitism, and even some of the liberators were under the influence of the anti-Semitism. No.
Yes, in a way, the Russian army contained a lot of the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians were very, very anti-Semitic. In Ukraine happened to be the Sobibor, where the Ukrainians guards themselves helped the Nazis to round up the Jews and stand them by the pit and shoot them into the pit by the thousands. Towns were wiped out. And yes, I have to say, when I was traveling back and I went out to the railroad station where there was a Russian troops going through in this town, and I asked for some food, because in some of the times by that time I was on my own, and this Russian soldier showed me the butt of the gun, shoved it in my side. So it wasn't too sympathetic, naturally. But thanks God I was liberated by the United States Army, and I was handled very gratefully. I still grateful every day that I'm here today. Only through the grapevine, and even that was very, very little. Some of the people who talk German and had befriended some of the Nazis somehow, they got some news toward the end of it. But the best news was when we were hearing the Allied forces heavy artillery in the distance. But mind you, I was taken to the camp end of June 1944. The Allied forces already landed in Normandy, and I was taken deep into Germany. It took almost 11 months to fight this war with a lot of losses.
Question was, is there any similarity between the Nazis and the communists? Not really. In communism, a lot of the things were regulated. A lot of political people who were speaking up against communism, they disappeared when we lived in Hungary, and we don't exactly know what happened to them. So that similarity was there. They didn't do it as openly. I think maybe that was the difference. Yes?
No, unfortunately, I didn't even got his name. It's just traded clothes, and he stayed in Auschwitz, and I hope he was good enough shape to go, because before the Red Army approached Auschwitz, the Nazis ordered all the 8,000 people who were there to a death march, and they marched till they fall into Germany, and very few survived that death march.
Yes. Question was how successful we are so far fighting against discrimination, and how far we have to go. Well, we still have to go. I really can see just from the time since we live in this country that a lot of the discrimination, it eased up. I mean, there is discrimination, and it's discrimination going on all over the world, but somewhat it's better. I remember when we first came to this country, the freedom of the black and the discrimination of the black population was still much more outstanding than it is now. And there is definitely still discrimination about religion and against Jews, but I think in such a way that it's a hidden anti-Semitism, it's a hidden discrimination. Because of our laws, people cannot stand up and say, well, I hate this race or I hate that race, but that is there, and I think that's up to each individual to fight it. I always tell young people that each individual can do something about it. If you hear a racial joke, just right there, if you just tell the person, I don't think this is funny, this can lead to other problems, you stifle something right at the beginning. But I think as long as we are listening to people who is discriminating, we are allowing this discrimination to grow. If anybody have maybe one more question, and then, yes?
There's a good chance that when I have children, they won't have somebody like you to hear the stories. If there was one thing that you'd want them to know, what would that be?
Treat people as like you like to be treated yourself. If you do that, it will never happen to others. And to tell you one thing, the Spielberg group are taking a lot of videos of people who are survivors. My husband and my story have been videoed, and hopefully one of these days it's going to be on the internet. And I also tell young people that they should be remembering this the rest of their life when they met a survivor, because let's face it, my husband and I are one of the youngest ones here in Oregon between the survivors. The rest of them is in mid-70s and 80s, so it won't be too many of us around for too long. But I want to thank you for being such a wonderful audience, and obviously you were listening, I can tell by the questions, and I hope you understood our accent. I don't care how long we're going to live here, this is not going to go away. And it was a privilege for us to be here, and if you have any further questions, we're going to stand by the pictures and be very happy to answer you. Thank you again.